A seismic shift is taking place in world affairs.
The U.S. trade conflict has diminished Canada's economic prospects.
Decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States is over.
Double our non-U.S. exports over the course of the next decade.
What we're seeing here is the president is losing this battle.
Trade negotiations between the two countries remain stalled.
This isn't just a policy debate. What started as a calculated political gambit by President Trump in early 2025 has exploded into one of the most consequential trade battles in decades, reshaping the very fabric of North America's economy and touching millions of lives on both sides of the border. What you don't know is that over 140,000 jobs in the U.S. tourism sector alone hang in the balance. Industries from steel mills to electric vehicle assembly lines are trembling, because two nations are now locked in a tariff war escalating every month. In this video, we will break down the full story, from Trump's initial tariff hikes in February to Canada's swift retaliation, revealing the real economic fallout and personal hardships behind the headlines, and we'll uncover how this conflict is forcing Canada to diversify its trade away from the U.S., signaling a seismic shift in global commerce. Without wasting a second, let's dive in. The ignition point came on February 1st, when President Trump signed an executive order slapping 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods, plus 10% on energy products, citing national security and unfair practices. After a brief pause, these took hold on March 4th, shaking established trade. Canada fired back immediately, retaliating with its own 25% tariffs on approximately 30 billion Canadian dollars of U.S. imports, targeting steel, aluminum, agriculture, and more. It was one of the fiercest tit-for-tat moves seen in recent history. By March 12th, the U.S. expanded tariffs on steel and aluminum imports globally, including the 25% tariffs on Canadian products. The conflict escalated further on April 3rd, when U.S. tariffs hit Canadian automobiles and auto parts at 25%, sparing USMCA-compliant vehicles. Canada matched this move on April 9th with its own tariffs on U.S. auto exports. Could it get worse? It did. On August 1st, tariffs on non-USMCA Canadian imports surged to 35%, and the Canadian dollar weakened 2 to 3% as businesses and markets braced for disruption. But a politically charged twist came in October. When Trump added a 10% tariff hike citing fentanyl concerns, Canada pushed back hard with policies promoting Buy Canadian and announced targeted relief measures to support affected industries. Today, these tariffs affect over $80 billion in daily cross-border trade, a staggering blow to deeply integrated supply chains that once defined cooperation between these neighbors. Meanwhile, border crossings like Detroit-Windsor and Buffalo-Niagara have ground to a crawl. A new 25% tariff on medium and heavy-duty trucks imposed November 1st has added costs and complexity, prolonging delays and putting freight on hold. These bottlenecks ripple through supply chains, impacting factories, stores, and finally, you. From the steel mills of Hamilton to the vineyards of Niagara, industries face soaring costs and deep uncertainty. Higher tariffs on metals and autos force vital reconsideration of investments and production, while agricultural and food producers face disrupted supply chains and shifting export demands. Political leaders hold firm, but businesses and communities are feeling the sting daily, trapped in economic limbo. Tariffs aren't just numbers. They translate to lost jobs, shuttered businesses, and strained families. Canadian families who used to spend summers exploring Florida or the U.S. West Coast now hesitate. The threat of tariffs, border delays, and reports of Canadian travelers being scrutinized have created an atmosphere of fear and frustration. Yet with growing resentment over tariffs and political rhetoric, bookings for U.S. destinations this winter have plummeted sharply. Florida, among the hottest vacation spots, took the hardest hit. This drop isn't just inconvenient. It threatens up to 140,000 American jobs in the tourism and hospitality sectors. Workers in hotels, restaurants, amusement parks, and transportation. Their livelihoods hanging in the balance. Manufacturing, too, has felt the shockwaves of this trade war. Auto assembly plants in Ontario, working within tightly knit North American supply chains, have announced multiple layoffs and shift cuts. Steel mills and aluminum foundries across both countries have reduced production given tariff-induced price shocks and uncertainty. Exports from Canada to the U.S. have fallen over 15% year over year, a sharp reversal from the growing trend just a year ago. Consumer prices are rising. Though tariffs affect industries first, those costs almost always trickle down to the everyday shopper. From food prices to the cost of electronics, consumers in both nations are paying more. What's your experience with rising prices or delays caused by this trade dispute? Drop your story below. In Canada, this economic disruption has darkened growth forecasts. The Bank of Canada now projects a growth rate shrinking from 1.8% early in the year to barely 1% or less as trade frictions persist, while unemployment has crept over 7%. For businesses, the picture is harsh. Surveys conducted in August showed that 63% of Canadian companies reported higher expenses due to tariffs, more than half reported falling profits, and nearly half saw reduced revenues. Supply chain disruptions affected 42%, while 36% were forced to pause investments. Only a small fraction reported any benefit, underscoring how painful the trade war remains. Canada's long-term economic strategy partially hopes to diversify markets outside the U.S., but the transition is slow and costly, leaving industries and workers vulnerable in the near term. For workers, a job isn't just pay, it's a lifeline, but tariffs have frayed trust in ties that once felt unbreakable. And while tariffs escalate, so do the political tensions. President Trump has stood firm, framing the tariffs as necessary leverage to protect American jobs and industries, even suggesting they could remain indefinitely until political conditions change. Canada, however, has not taken the hits lying down, but rancor following controversial Ontario political ads and hardline U.S. rhetoric has stalled progress. Diplomatically, Canada is pivoting, forging stronger trade relationships with Europe and China to reduce dependency on an increasingly unpredictable southern neighbors. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court questions the emergency powers used to impose tariffs, a ruling that could reshape trade authority. With tariffs rattling the decades-old U.S.-Canada trade partnership, Canada now faces a critical choice: diversify or become more vulnerable. And Canada chooses to grow stronger, diversifying exports beyond its southern neighbor. European markets, particularly Germany, France, and recently the UK, have seen surges in Canadian steel, aluminum, and agricultural imports as businesses seek stability beyond the tariff storm. China, despite political tensions, remains a key alternative destination. Canadian energy exports now enter Asian markets through expanded West Coast ports like British Columbia's Trans Mountain Pipeline, marking a historic shift in trade routes and partnerships. But this diversification isn't a simple fix. Rerouting billions in exports requires new logistics, regulatory alignments, and time. Global trade patterns are realigning fundamentally as the Canada-US trade war contributes to a fragmented landscape marked by regional blocs and shifting alliances. Trade wars aren't afar. They're here, touching your life in ways most news outlets don't explore. Subscribe now to stay informed on trade, politics, and economic stories shaping the future of the US and Canada.